Hello, everyone. I'm sorry, I'm like 6 minutes late. I was running behind trying to finalize some things. But if you are on, come join me, like, share, invite, and be a part of the discussion. Today we are speaking about the leg, the foot, and the ankle. We're going to examine those joints, those muscles, the joint actions, and injuries that are commonly associated with these body parts. So, come and join us if you can. If not, watch the replay and I will still respond to you. We had a dynamic conversation on last week with our panelists as we were finishing up the knee. But as I stated last week, um, you will see how these many joints are connected to one another and how their actions are interdependent on one another. And when you have a dysfunction in one joint or muscle group, how it begins to impact other muscle groups that you really didn't think that it would have a major impact. So we started with the hip, and we learned that the hip is a ball and socket joint, and it has circumduction, meaning that it moves in every plane of motion, and that is because we use our hip joints for so much of the movements that we create within our bodies. And so we just wanted to show how those muscles are attached to both the hip, but then they come down and they cross over and they attach to the knee. And so then we came down to the knee and we saw how those same muscles that were helping the hip move and create motion there were also creating motion in the kneecap. We learned how the knee bears, it's such a small joint, let's say that, and such a small bone, but it bears and it does so much work. And the impact is large that it has on the leg when there is a dysfunction happening, whether within the joint itself or in the musculature that's surrounded and or attached to it. And so then we looked at some injuries that were common to both of those joints, and we saw how those injuries begin to impact again the rest of the leg when you are making certain movements and things of nature. You when you get injured, you have compensatory injuries, which can cause other detrimental injuries to your legs in that capacity. We talked about how form is everything. When you're training those muscles, how it's very important that you make sure that the muscles that you're training, that you focus on those muscle groups so that you get the full benefit of the exercise that you're doing to enhance the movement of that particular joint and or muscle groups. So this week we're going to explore, we're going to continue to move down the leg, and we're going to look at the bottom of the leg and moving into the ankle and the foot joint. And we kind of always group those joints and muscles in together because they're really so interconnected, and you kind of can't talk about one without the other. So I have my little assistant who's going to help us get through this. And so I have my notes too. So that's what you see me looking at, going through my notes. So I have my little assistant, and he is going to help us. Okay. And then I have my little muscle. He's saying hi to everybody. His little wave hand is jacked up. But so this week we're talking about the bottom portion of the leg, the ankle, and the foot. Okay. So we're going to start here. So the first bone in the lower part of our leg is the tibia, which is the larger of the two bones. And these two bones are likened to the two bones in our arm, the radius and the ulnar, which we'll get to when we come up top. But you have the ulnar and the radius. And so we'll get to those, but these two bones in the lower part of aspect of our leg are likened to the radius and the ulnar and how they operate together synergistically together in creating movements for the lower half of our leg, right? So again, the larger of the two bones is the tibia, and if we remember, the kneecap also sits right on the head of this tibia, and because remember it is being held by ligaments and joints, so it kind of sits there. They have to put it here so that it stays. The smaller of the bones, which is longer, is called the fibula, and that's this little guy here. Okay, this guy only holds about 10% of supports about 10% of our total body weight, and that's because even though it's long and it goes from the top of the tibia all the way to the bottom and the top of the foot, it is a very small bone, as you can see. Try to get that closer so you can see that it is long, but it's small, so it doesn't support a lot of weight. And so as we move down into the foot, we have this large part here, which is called the calcaneus, which is what we know as commonly as your heel. Okay. And then you have your talus, which is the top of the foot. And then you have, let me see if I can get up so you can kind of see. You have your tarsals, you have your metatarsals, and then you have your phalanges, which are the actual toes. I hope you can see that better. So you have your tarsals, your metatarsals, and then your phalanges, which are the actual toes. And there are smaller bones in each section, the tarsals, metatarsals, and phalanges, but for this exercise, you guys don't need to know all of those specifics because you're not, you just want to know how to work out safely and know about your body. And so that is what we talk about. So with this joint, again, as I stated before, it's right here, and there's a space here, but it has to be glued here to the skeleton so that it, shows up right. But it's kind of sitting here in this space, and that's why it is between the femur and the tibial head where the knee sits, right? And so again, we notice that how a lot of these bones, so you have your femur and you have your hip, and how they all are kind of interconnected, so that they function properly in producing the movement, the desired movement that we want. So when we're walking, you have hip flexion, extension, you have knee flexion, extension, you have dorsiflexion and plantarflexion of the foot. And so all of these have to work together synergistically to create those movements. Okay? So now let's talk about the muscles that cover these bones. So let me get to that. Okay, so I'm going to use my other helper to help with that. So here's my little guy. I'm going to try to use this pointer today. See if it helps us. Okay. Oh, well. So in his little stand. So we're going to start in the back of the leg. Okay, so here, let me see if I can get my pointer to go in the right place. You have your popliteal space, and that's just like that little open space in the back of your leg, right there. Okay, and back there are two muscles called the plantaris, which kind of crosses across that space, and then you have the popliteus, which is under the plantaris. Now, these are the common muscles that you're familiar with. So, like you have your calves, which they're known as two lobes, and they're known as, the proper name is the gastrocnemius. And underneath the gastrocnemius is you have the soleus. And so, I'm going to see if you can kind of see the soleus from this aspect. So the soleus is underneath this guy, and you can't really see it very clearly. Then along the side of your leg, you have your peroneal muscles. You have your peroneal longus and brevis. Okay, and then you have your tibialis anterior. So that is the muscle that's like right here prominent. Some people have it very prominent on the front of their legs, but it's a little muscle, that little muscle right here. And then you have other muscles that are deep that you can't see within here, even in this my little helper here. You have your extensor digitorum longus, and you have your extensor hallucis, which you actually can see here. The hallucis, I don't know if you can see his toe, but the hallucis, extensor hallucis, that helps with lifting up your toe. And then you have the flexors, which is the tibialis anterior, which is kind of underneath. You have your flexor digitorum longus and your flexor hallucis longus. Then you have your calcaneal tendon, okay, which we know as the Achilles tendon. And you'll see how it is formed from the gastrocnemius and the soleus and the peroneal muscles. They all come down to converge and form this tendon, which inserts at the bottom of your heel, which is your calcaneus, and we know it as your Achilles tendon, right? And then you have some this is called the flexor retinaculum, and then there's another retinaculum here that helps with the motion of pointing, flexing, and things of that nature of movement of this lower leg. So let's talk about the movement that we see. Okay, so I'm going to use my skeleton for this because he's a little bit more agile. And I'm trying to use my stand so that I can really kind of show you the movement. Okay, so let's lift this guy up. Let's see. So when you look at movement of the foot, we point the foot down, or that's when you are doing a calf, kind of like a calf raise, when you're doing a seated calf raise, and then you flex it up as you push, pointing and flexion. So this is plantar flexion, and this is dorsiflexion. You can also think of plantar flexion as pushing your foot down on the gas, pointing your toe, and then dorsiflexion is when you kind of lift it up. So pointing and flexion, plantar flexion, dorsiflexion. Okay, then you have inversion. Let's see if I can show you. Inversion is pushing the foot inward. Eversion is when you push the foot outwards, like that. So inversion, eversion. Okay, then you have rotation. Okay, and so all of these muscles help with these type of movements in the foot. Feel free. I know this lower leg doesn't seem as exciting as the rest of the body, but it does help us with moving our foot and lower leg, right? So a couple of fun facts is that this muscle, well, not muscle, these joints and bones were created for to create stability here. So this joint here along, and this will be where your ankle, what makes up your ankle joint and things like that. And so that is made for stability, right? Because you want to be able to be stable when you plant your foot, right? You don't want your foot wobbling around every time you plant it. You want it to be stable so that you'll be able to pivot and push off of that foot when you're doing like agility drills. Say, for instance, you're doing basketball. You need to be able to run and stop and plant that foot. Then you need to be able to turn, which you have some eversion or with some internal rotation at the knee, and you need to be able to push and change direction. So this joint helps you, and the collective joints help you to be able to accomplish that type of agility, right? Because you don't want to have a ball and socket joint which has circumduction in the knee and in the foot when you're trying to stop, plant, and change directions. You need to be able to know that these joints will bend where you need them to bend just enough and put your foot down and be able to turn and pivot and create and go into a different direction. And so that is the beauty of the body and how it is made. So when we talk about the muscles of it, there's a particular tendon, because we know that, and we have learned all through these last few weeks, that all of these major muscle groups, they all usually converge and form a tendon afterwards. So the tendon is nothing but a convergence of these muscles that form this really thick band, and it inserts, it's a connective tissue that inserts at different points of our bones to keep connect those muscles to the bones, right? So that they're attached. It's the point of an attachment. So also we have what we call the pes anserinus tendon, and it is formed by the sartorius muscle here, the gracilis, and then you have the semimembranosus of the hamstring. And this tendon, which I'm going to say is this piece here, if those three muscles converge and form the pes anserius, tendon, which inserts right around the front under the knee. So why are muscles and tendons important? They are important, again, for connectivity to the bones and to the joints, so that we get the proper movement that we are desiring, that we're trying to form. And so one of the things that, we talked about those ligaments in the knee, also about the ACL and the MCL and the patella ligament and other ligaments that insert around and form this structure for the knee, right? And so they form the stability of the knee. And the same thing happens along the ankle, right? There are a lot of ligaments and tendons from the muscles that cover these lower bones. They converge and they begin to help support and form a supportive structure around that ankle. So we know that the ankle is kind of like the knee, and from that perspective, in that there are a lot of muscles and tendons that help support it and keep it stable. But a couple of other factors that help with the knee, with the ankle, I'm sorry, we have to also look at the type of loading and the position of the ankle at that time. So that's not much different than the knee, right? Because we know that the knee is more weight bearing than or as much, I should say, more or as much weight bearing as the ankle, right? And so again, if your muscles are not strong enough and then you're in a certain position, we can have breaks, we can have tears, we can have what we call compound fractures, which are that the bone broke and then it also came through the skin. We saw that, I want to say that was like 7 or 8 years ago when the young guy from, I think it was Michigan, who had that compound fracture after he went up for that layup and then he came down and it came right through. So a lot of that has to do with foundational practices and how we're building our muscles. And when we build muscles, we also give strength to our tendons and allow them to support us or support those joints properly. And so I would say the majority of those type of injuries are really contingent upon the strength of the muscle and the tendons that are supporting that joint. Also, there's a small percentage of people who have injuries as a result of some rare diseases that are hereditary, that impact bone and bone formation and bone strength. They impact musculature building or not. So there are some other rare diseases and events that happen within people that also contribute to these type of injuries. But for the most part, it really has to do with how you're training and preparing those muscles and tendons and those joints to accept those loads, those ground reactive forces, the shocks that come from the pounding and the impact of the actions that we have that we're creating, right? And so the next thing that we're going to talk about are common foot and leg and ankle injuries. And I did want to say that it has been clinically proven, and let me get my number correct, make sure I have the right number, that 85% of sprains are lateral side ankle sprains. And what that just means is lateral is the outside. So your ankle sprain usually is on this side. Okay. 85% are lateral. The rest are medial. But most common, you get sprain on your ankle out here. And that's what that's saying. Okay. So we're going to kind of talk about why that is. And we're going to examine some of the more common injuries that we have. Yes, Charles, I do record these. You can find them still on my YouTube page. You can go to my Body Integrity Fitness page. I place them there. And also on, I have a YouTube page, Body Integrity Fitness, and you can always go back and enjoy these recordings at the comfort of your own home. You can leave me comments. I will go back and look for comments and respond to them. So the first one, the first injury that we're going to examine is plantar fasciitis. So what is plantar fasciitis? There is another very large tendon that begins at your heel, and then it fans out and it inserts on each one of your metatarsals. So it starts here and then it fans out and inserts in each one of your metatarsals. Okay. Um, and that is called your plantar fascia. This particular fascia at the bottom of our foot is there because it supports our arches. Now, I didn't get into high arches and low arches and things of that nature. I'm not going to get into that in depth. But that particular fascia is what helps supports that. And depending on if you have a high arc or a low arc or a no arc, like me, in my case, I have a very, very flat foot. A lot of times it will determine how susceptible you are to developing plantar fascia. So what happens with plantar fasciitis? This little tendon gets inflamed, and it gets inflamed for a multitude of reasons, okay? And when it gets inflamed, what happens is that the bottom of that foot becomes very stiff. And so when you walk, you usually plantarflex and dorsiflex like this, right? There is flexibility in the foot. And what happens when that tendon becomes inflamed, because it does become swollen, what happens is that you lose some of that mobility in your foot. And so instead of walking heel to toe with the plantar and dorsiflexion as you're walking, you kind of just end up slamming that foot and kind of raising up on your toe, and you kind of slam and raise up on your toe. And that is just because it's painful, right? Anybody who's ever had plantar fasciitis, they know that when this pain is happening, it's most prevalent anytime that they have had a chance to rest or become cold, quote unquote. The feet have become cold. So when you're sitting down for a period of time, or most often when you wake up the first thing in the morning, you find that you cannot bear any weight on that foot. Some people have reported about stumbling and almost falling, or they have to wait, or some people have hobbled, so that once they get up and kind of initially break that first stiffness, that then they can start walking, and it goes into a limp, and then they get into the full walk. So that is because that particular connective tissue is inflamed, and it prevents you from being able to have the full mobility of the walking action of full plantar and full dorsiflexion, meaning we still kind of point when we walk and we flex when we walk. So when we lift our heel up, we're flexion, which is dorsiflexion, and then we're plantarflexion when we put our foot down and we push off, right, at our toes. So that is the movement that we create, and that particular ligament helps us, that connective tissue helps with that, as well as being a support. And so when it is inflamed, again, your mobility, your ability to walk properly and execute that gait properly, the full gait, it is limited. So as a result of that, again, it moves up the leg. So when this particular portion of the bottom of your foot is stiff, then it begins to move up through your calves. Okay, it makes the Achilles tight, and then your calf muscles become tight, your soleus, the popliteal space. Sometimes when people have knee problems, they have been known to develop what they call a Baker's cyst right here in the back of this space, where fluid has collected back here, a lot of times from the inflammation, and they have this big cyst back here. And a lot of times it'll drain on its own, but some people have it drain. And so how do we deal with plantar flexion? Well, the first thing we want to do is we want to get that inflammation down. So icing, I suggest taking ibuprofen something that is an anti-inflammatory that will bring the inflammation down. And I realize that some of you people are allergic to ibuprofen per se. And so if you can't take ibuprofen, then try naproxen, which is what's found in Aleve. Personally, Aleve does nothing for me at all. People have so many wonderful reports about what Aleve does. That drug is naproxen. It is in an over-the-counter form because there is a prescribed form of naproxen that is a little bit more higher in the dosage amount. And in the active ingredient in naproxen is a higher amount when you get the prescribed form of it. And so you want to get that inflammation down. Icing it is uncomfortable. Rolling out on tennis balls, golf balls, the hard soft balls, so not the really big I think that's the 16-inch. So the 12-inch hard softballs that they use in fast pitch, the ones that are hard. A baseball, the hard baseballs. Some people have been told to freeze water bottles, which that does the dual duty of icing and rolling that tendon out, because when you get rid of the pain and inflammation, that tendon is still kind of locked up, and so you want to smooth that tendon out to its proper resting length of the tendon, and so that you can gain the mobility back. So stretching out the calf muscle is very important. Stretching out the Achilles tendon is very important. And so it is something that is not fixed overnight. Let me say that. It is a process. And so that rolling out and that stretching should be done daily. It should be done at least 2 to 3 times a day at the very least, but you should stretch more. Anytime you think of it, you should think about stretching out your calf and your Achilles tendon to loosen up the tightness that is around that particular connective tissue, that ligament, the plantar fascia. And I have dealt with plantar fasciitis, which we will talk about next week when I have my panelists on again, who are going to be, telling you about their experience with these particular injuries. Okay. So again, calf stretching, a lot of calf stretching, a lot of stretching of your Achilles tendon, rolling it out, myofascial release. It really helps. Let me preface it by saying it is painful. Myofascial release is painful, period. Let me just put that out. Okay, there's no easy getting around that. And that is because you have to understand your muscle is in what we call adhesions, what you know as knots. So we're trying to smooth out those knots in your muscles. So that is why that hurts, okay? Because we really are smoothing out those knots in those muscles. We know them as adhesions. So it hurts. And especially with your foot being as sensitive as it is, it's going to hurt. So just go ahead and bear it and get the relief. You will find relief. Okay. So the next thing we know is your Achilles tendon or tendinopathy. When you have the swollen tendon with the pain, we call it the tendinopathy, right? The tendinitis. And then if you have the swelling and there's some tissue damage, then then there's the tendinitis. So we have to catch these things before they worsen, before they progress. When you get these little injuries or you get these little quirks, take care of them immediately so that they don't progress. Because if you don't do something, they're going to progress and get worse. Okay. So the next thing we have is what we call the medial tibial stress syndrome, and that is nothing no more than shin splints. And so that is that muscle that we talked about earlier, which is your tibialis. Let me see. This little muscle here, the tibialis anterior muscle, right? So shin splints are the devil. And if left untreated, most commonly the shin splints usually end in stress fracture of the tibialis. I've seen it with a lot of my cross-country friends because they do a lot of long distance running. That stress, the impact from the ground reactive forces and the shock that's happening with the pounding on the concrete and even on the track, they usually develop the shin splints first. I have known someone who developed, she had knots. I mean, her shin muscle was knotted up, like you could see the little knots protruding through her skin. And it can continue to progress. And so, the first, there are some exercises that you can do. So one of them is the shin taps. So I'm going to kind of demonstrate that with my little guy here. So your foot is here. You can stand up and you just want to lift and lower the toe. So it's shin taps. And you're only lifting and lowering the foot. My guy is just moving because that's the movement that you're going to get from the shin taps, right? And what that does is that activates the tibialis anterior or the shin muscle, and it helps, number one, strengthen that muscle because that's usually the cause of it. The muscle is weak. And so when you get into different exercises, they become sore because they become overworked because they haven't done this work. And this is why it's important to have a program that you follow that gradually gets you and increases intensity. Because if you are a person who is leading in a mostly sedentary life, meaning there's no physical activity at all, you kind of just go to work and you come home and then you want to start exercising, I am in no way discouraging from exercising. I'm saying let's find an exercise program that gradually gets you into that exercise and gradually intensifies the workouts over time, which is why I am not a proponent of CrossFit for people who are sedentary. I just don't think that it's safe for you to go from a sedentary lifestyle to this intense of a lifestyle of training. It's very, very intense. And if your body has not then injuries occur, which we know it happens in CrossFit. Not gonna linger on that. Okay. And so what we can do with that, again, is icing initially. Any NSAID, non-steroidal anti-inflammatory drug that can help you get rid of the inflammation. Because here's a little tidbit about inflammation and swelling. Inflammation inside where the muscle is swelling on the inside, and then you have swelling that shows up, which happens commonly, which we're moving into ankle sprains. It swells up, right? Because that tissue is damaged. Mostly what happens with ankle sprains is that the ligaments that are supporting the ankle, they get stretched out of place. And a lot of times, again, that's from weakness of the muscles surrounding those tendons that they converge and form from. And so when those muscles are weak, they cause a laxity in the strength of those tendons, and it creates instability within the joints. And so when you have that, then you have increased risk for injuries. And so a lot of times what you will find is like with most athletes who are highly trained, they may just roll their ankle, right? And a lot of times it just rolls. You know, they have to limp it out for a little while, but they usually can go right back into playing or doing whatever the activity is. They can later ice it and then they'll be okay, good to go. There might be some minor soreness and bruising, but for the most part, they're good to go. But then when you have that sprain, you have the bruising, you have the discoloration, you have the swelling in that ankle. And again, it's usually the outside of the ankle, the lateral side. And it is not good to work out or work through swelling. And this is why. We have proprioceptors in our bodies, located over all our bodies. They are spatial and they are dimensional, with telling our bodies where our bodies is, or where your body is positioned at every point in time. Okay, so your body right now knows that you're standing, or your body right now, for me, it knows that I'm sitting, right? It will know if I cross my ankles. So it is positionally aware of where I am spatially in this dimension, right? And so when your joint, there's swelling around the joint, those proprioceptors are disoriented because of the swelling. And that is why you shouldn't, and so it cannot accurately determine spatially or locational wise or positional wise where your joint is positioned. And so because of that, you can cause greater injury to yourself and that particular joint that's experiencing that swelling at the time, because your body can't determine where it is. And it's kind of gauging. And so it's going off of the swelling when that is really not the position of your foot or your leg or your knee or your arm or just your body in general. So that's why it's very, very important for you to allow the swelling to go down before you engage in your activities. You should have an understanding of this. For example, if you've ever sprained your foot and there was any swelling, you had to quote unquote get your bearings when you stood up, because your body has to know spatially where you're positioned, where you are, where your toes are in relation to your heel, in relation to your knee, in relation to your leg, in relation to your hip, in relation to your pelvis, in relation to your spine. All of these are neurological pathways that are firing and communicating to your brain. And of course, it's happening in milliseconds. And so you're not going to, it doesn't take that long for this pathway to occur. But that's why you have to get your bearings when you are, when you're injured and when you're getting up, because you have to know spatially where you are in that right in that movement range. Your body has to know where you are spatially. So that is why it is important for us to take care of our bodies, right? It's very important that we understand that we are a closed kinetic chain, okay? One thing I did want to talk about too was a pronated and supinated foot. And that's how we bear our weight. So you have a pronated foot when people their feet kind of lean in, and you have that supinated foot where we call the heel is running over, right? So it's like this. And that's just because your ankles are weak, dude. Or lady, your ankles are weak, because men pronate and supinate as well. It's just more evident in women when we're wearing our heels and we are wearing them heels. Your ankles are weak. And and probably there is some excess weight. That's the reason for that. And so we have to work on strengthening those ankles. And it's not just happens in large women and men. There are a lot of slender women whose ankles are weak, and so their heels are running over too. We have seen this. So I do not want anyone to think that having pronated or supinated feet is just a weight thing. Weight is one of the factors that add, but it is a weak ankle thing. And so that has to do with the muscles in your leg that are supporting and surrounding the tendons and muscles in your foot. Now, I did not go through all of the muscles in your foot. There are so many. I believe that there are just 30, there are 30 muscles in your foot. And I think there are 12 tendons or so in your foot and ankle. So there are a lot, but that's not what you guys want to know about. So that would be a discussion for health and fitness people, so that they can better formulate your workout. So I didn't want to go too in depth with these teachings. My goal for these teachings is to help you understand the common parts of your body and how they work and how you can effectively train them, understanding how injuries arise, how you can give you some basic tools on how to kind of nurse yourself back to health in those areas, and then get you back going. And I always stress, and I'm going to keep stressing, even when we move to the top of the body, that everything starts neuromuscular first. You train your body neuromuscular first, and then we go into hypertrophy, which is building of those muscles. When we train those muscles how to properly fire, how to properly contract and relax, which muscle groups we should be recruiting so that we can make the action. When you learn how to do that, you will find that you will decrease your risk of injuries. Stretching is important. Even though there are articles and reviews and studies that kind of go either way for stretching, what I have seen as an athlete, stretching matters. If you do not stretch, you increase your risk and your rate of injury. That is what I have seen throughout all of my years as a coach and as an athlete. Stretching is important. And as you get older, you need to do more of it. And you should not stretch on what we call cold muscles. You need to warm up those muscles. I've always used the analogy of a rubber band to describe cold and warm muscles. Your cold muscles are like new rubber bands. You know how hard it is to stretch them, right? And we say we just got to keep stretching it so we can get the stretch widen on it, right? Because if you stretch a new rubber band, it'll snap right back in place. And if you stretch it too far, too quickly, it'll snap, right? So that is what happens on cold muscles. When your muscles are not cold, you can stretch them so far, but if you try to push them beyond that limit on that stretch, they'll snap. You get tears, you get strains. That's what happens. And that is just a basic analogy. Of course, it's more deeper than that. And I can take you through the whole thing, but I don't think that that's necessary. You just kind of need to understand what's happening. When your muscles are warm, and that's a rubber band that has stretch, or if you've used it a couple of times, it's easy to stretch. You can get in clothes or put more papers or whatever it is that you're trying to enclose, more hair. into the rubber bands when it is a little bit more flexible. And the same thing with your muscles. When you're especially trying to build the muscles and you're training those muscles, you want the muscle to be at its maximum capacity so that you can teach it to go at that level and beyond, and not overstrain it or stretch it out of place, causing a strain or even a tear when you've gone past that particular capacity of the muscle stretch. Then that's when injuries occur. And so I hope that you have gained some more knowledge about your body this week. Thank you for tuning in and joining in. Um, I will have my panelists on next week, and we will discuss in depth about our experience with injuries, with the different injuries that I mentioned here. Most commonly is shin splints and strains, and plantar fasciitis is what I've seen prevalent in these last few years. And we'll talk about a little bit more about preventative methods, about shoe choice, and muscle uh, muscle focused choice on how you're deciding to develop these muscles that support these joints. And we'll talk about how to heal from those muscles injuries. So I just thank you again for joining me for this hour. Your time is appreciated. I hope you like and share, invite someone, watch the replay, leave me a comment. I do go back and I do check um, those replays. So thank you for joining me. Enjoy the rest of your evening and weekend, and we'll see you on next week at 3:30 Central Standard Time, at 4:30 Eastern Standard Time. Thanks. Bye-bye.